We will now start our session, Pen on the Pulse of the Taliban. Our panelists for this session are Nasim, Zehra, Riaz, Mohammad Khan, and Omar Zakhilwal. Our moderator for this session is Rashed, Rahman. I request the panelists for this session to take their place on stage.
You know that we have a time problem in every session, as my friend Mujahid Barelvi just kept reminding us. Now, we do have a panelist missing, which is the Afghan ambassador. I'm not sure if he's still here, if he's left. So I think we'll just have to proceed without him, and if he joins us, all to the good. Would you like to join us? We have a somewhat cryptic title for today's session. Pen on the Pulse of the Taliban. Ever since I read it in the program that was sent to me, I've been scratching my head what it means, what I think it means. And the panelists are free to disagree, of course. Does the pen have its finger on the pulse of the Taliban? I think this is the question that needs to be asked. Do we reflect in the media and in our writing and other means of communication the true nature and picture of the Taliban, what they're about and what they have wrought and continue to wreak? So I think without further ado, let me introduce the panel. Nasim Zehra hardly needs an introduction. She is a TV anchor, journalist, writer, and a frequent presence on these panels and literary festivals, I'm happy to note. And sitting next to her is Riaz Mohammad Khan Sahab, who's had a very distinguished diplomatic career and has written a book, which I think is very relevant to today's discussion. So we have two very knowledgeable interlocutors with us. So without further ado, I'll ask Nasim Zehra to kick the goal. Now, the point is, Nasim, do I understand correctly what it is that we are trying to say through this title, i.e., do we really understand and do we accurately reflect what the Taliban are about?
Thank you, Rashed. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My thought was that one should just say what one knows about the Taliban, its context and its relevance to Pakistan-Afghanistan relations and what it means for Afghanistan, and where are the Taliban right now located in the context of broader, regional security, etc. So since it was much like Azad Shairi, you can pick up whatever meaning you want. So it's in that context I'll basically. I think when we're looking at, I don't want to go into the history, everybody is aware of that. I thought I'll just take it from where we are right now in terms of the Taliban. Clearly, its relevance in terms of security in the region, especially in terms of Pakistan's own security and the Afghan security. And let me just qualify here, we're discussing the Afghan Taliban. So where are the Afghan Taliban in terms of their current position at multiple levels, whether it's military, political, diplomatic? At the military level, the Taliban obviously are gaining ground in Afghanistan, but it would be incorrect to assume that they're gaining ground and that they'll get to the point of 1996 when they took over Kabul. So while they have established a kind of balance of power and they're threatening Kabul, but certainly they are far from, as I said, taking over Afghanistan. This is not it's not 1996, it's a different period. And as much as they are making progress, there are also elements and major factors that will restrict the Taliban movement. I think the other important factor is that after Mullah Omar, as we know, especially since the information and news about Mullah Omar no longer existing came out, there were major fissures within the Taliban ranks. That has to some extent altered. You have Mullah Mansoor, who now has greater support amongst the Taliban. He has, he can be referred to as the Taliban leader now, who has the maximum support from amongst the Taliban, but he's no Mullah Omar. In terms of Taliban, if we look at the military position of the Taliban currently, it would be correct to say that therefore they are in a negotiating position with Kabul, and Taliban in recent months have come up with their own demands, and the demands from lifting of ban from their funds, lifting ban on their movement, and so on and so forth. So that's where the Taliban are today, and they pose a genuine threat and are causing great destabilization of Afghanistan. This is to state the obvious. And as far as Pakistan is concerned, before I come to the quadrilateral process, where you have 4 countries right now trying to deal with the Taliban issue and work on dialogue between Taliban and Kabul. If we look at Pakistan, I think that's the big question for all of us. Pakistan's policy on the Taliban, I think, moves on multiple tracks. Number one, today the Pakistan government understands, and the Pakistan security establishment, which has basically been calling the shots on this policy, understands that the Taliban are a major threat to Pakistan as well, and any kind of major gains for the Taliban in Afghanistan will have a blowback effect on Pakistan. And in the past, I think Ambassador Riaz will describe it in detail, but engaging the Taliban has not been easy. In some ways, I think Pakistan is responsible for multiple factors, but Pakistan also a critical factor amongst many factors, has been responsible for the birth of the Taliban. We allowed them space, we allowed them sanctuaries, we gave them training, etc. Yet today, Pakistan is not in a position to control the Taliban totally, and one of the biggest complaints that Kabul has vis-a-vis Pakistan on Taliban is that Pakistan isn't doing enough. Now, I'd just like to submit to you that of course Taliban do operate from Pakistan, we've had evidence, etc., but the question is that can the Pakistan military take up arms against the Taliban? If it does, what does it mean? But at the same time, Pakistan has been able to essentially arm twist the Taliban and get them to the negotiating table, as Pakistan did in Murray last year, negotiating table with the Kabul government. My own sense is that perhaps Pakistan can do more than it is doing in terms of influencing the Taliban, because Pakistan is also, I think there's a wait and see game also that Pakistan is playing. At one level, Pakistan is part of the quadrilateral group where 4 countries are working on getting the Taliban and Afghanistan and Kabul to engage. But the expectation from Pakistan is much greater because they're based in Pakistan. But Pakistan really faces a dilemma again of how far do you push the Taliban. As you know, multiple fronts have been opened because of our own blunders of the past, the cleanup operations, counter-terrorism operations that are continuing. So
I don't want you to go there for the moment. We'll come back to that.
Okay. So very quickly, should I end now? You have a couple of minutes? Okay. Last thought. So I think that that's always the critical question. But in addition to that, I think we have to look at what is happening inside Afghanistan as well. Obviously, Taliban are operating inside Afghanistan. You've got new factors, new elements, new players, deadly players like Daesh there as well. And you have within Kabul also intra-institutional, battles going on, and I met President Karzai, former President Karzai, in October, and he was saying that I'm completely supportive of dialogue with the Taliban, and it's important to engage the Taliban. And the big question, and I think 2 things as I conclude. One is that what is giving space to the Taliban in Afghanistan? That's the big question. One is historical, how things have happened and how they've got bases, etc. And with the exit of the NATO forces, in some ways, everybody was predicting that the Taliban are going to, their influence is going to expand because the Afghan forces don't have the kind of strength to push them back. But as we've seen inside Pakistan as well, once you let the genie out of the bottle, it's not easy to bottle it back again. So there's that issue, but also, and this is my concluding thought, that can a greater confidence, greater trust between Kabul and Islamabad / Rawalpindi squeeze the space for the Taliban? And finally, I mean, can we foresee a future where Taliban will be brought into the setup in Kabul on some terms? Can they be players in the future political setup of Afghanistan? I think those are some of the critical questions that continue to be asked. And the fact is that since Kabul decided and agreed to engage with the Taliban, as you know, that Kabul decided to engage with the Taliban, they feel at some level that that this is a group that cannot be wished away, and as we know, of course, for decades this is going on and can't be wished away. And how the Chinese feel about the Taliban.
Let's just hold it there.
Okay,
I want you to go now on another time. I don't know if this is a sign of the times or what, but the ambassador is unable to join us, and I've been asked to move to that chair. Riaz Muhammad Khan Sahab, you heard Nasim's comments. It's a long story and a long history, as we all know, decades and decades. And yet, some things were and are predictable and are taking a predictable course. History teaches us that Afghanistan is a difficult place to conquer and after conquering hold. And I think many invaders have found that to their cost. Now, given the current situation, we have a Taliban that after the hiccups surrounding Mullah Umar's revelation of his death seemed fractious, divided, and therefore not really partners for a dialogue, yet they are coming together. And yet we see a unity government in Kabul which is unity only in name, and we see a quadrilateral group trying to promote a dialogue with the Taliban, but perhaps not entirely in agreement amongst themselves. Comment, please.
Thank you very much. First, thank you for introducing me, and thank you for giving me a direction about what should I talk about, because I was also a bit puzzled by the subject which was given. Nasim said that maybe one should look a little bit in the past, look at the Taliban themselves, and then you have raised some of the questions as to what can we expect in the future. Taliban, well, you can look at the phenomena from various points of views. I, for one, believed that Taliban, first of all, was not a creation of Pakistan. It was a creation of circumstances waiting to happen. Once it happened, there were certain circumstances which then we thought there was an opportunity and we started supporting them. But if you look at the Taliban military tactics, etc., of the mid-90s and even earlier, they are very typical of how the Middle East, the Central Asians and the Afghans used to struggle for power in the 17th century, 18th century. The tactics that they deployed to surround Kabul, for example, and then moved to Jalalabad, came back to Sarobi, then came to Kabul. They are tactics that are reminiscent of the tactics of the earlier warriors of Central Asia and fortune seekers of Central Asia, rather than something that could have been conceived by the ISI or by Pakistani military, who is far more conventional in their thinking processes. Taliban themselves, well, they are a kind of a mix or blend, you can say. One aspect is the Afghan tribal traditions, culture, very stubborn people. Second, I think, is a quality which is certitude, which comes from their belief system, which is steeped in a austere, harsh interpretation of Islam. Third thing is the environment which produced them, environment of the madrasas, environment of war, and extremely difficult circumstances, with absolutely no exposure to anything modern. I would say most of these people, their touch with modernity was a trip to Peshawar, perhaps. So we are dealing with that kind of mindset. Now, in this mindset, with the kind of certitude that I have mentioned, there is little room for compromise, for flexibility. In fact, compromise and flexibility are often seen, not by just Taliban, but also earlier the Mujahideen, as a sign of weakness. So, sometimes when they are weak, they prefer to bide time rather than to show flexibility and compromise. So we are basically dealing with a very complex situation. Now, first, the situation itself is complex, and the perspectives that we have, say in Islamabad, if you can say there is a monolithic perspective in Islamabad, there is none. And also, if you look at from the perspectives of Kabul. So this adds to the confusion, this adds to the complexity of the situation. Now we talk a lot about reconciliation. Reconciliation on what kind of basis, first of all? There has to be, as you mentioned, government of unity. Unity means that there must be some kind of a united agenda on the part of Kabul. Is there one? Because as far as we know, there are difficulties. Kabul is very fractious. Secondly, there is this dependence on the so-called Pakistani influence over the Taliban. Do we really have that kind of influence? We have seen again and again, and I have in my second book, I had dwelt on this thing, that the Afghan Mujahideen, and for that matter even Afghan Taliban, they never really ever accepted Pakistan's point of view and Pakistan's proposals. I can give you a number of examples for that. What is the game about? And here I'll end with just one anecdote, and then I think we can continue the discussion. This was way back in 1990. And we were hoping that the Mujahideen at that time, the precursors of the Taliban, that they would somehow engage with the President Najibullah through the agency of the United Nations, and some kind of the government, a broad-based government of national reconciliation could be formed. So we were putting pressure on. Asad Durrani was the DGISI. So he finally said, look, why don't you people try? And he asked me, he said, okay, go and meet the number twos of these Mujahideen leaders. So I went there, I met them, I made a presentation in Urdu, of course. So after the presentation, I said there has been a lot of bloodshed, etc., all that, and there is need for peace. So one of them stood up and he gave me the stock response that, look, Mr. Riaz, you have said all this, but you are asking us to shake hands with communists. We have done jihad, we have done this. This was the stock answer they used to say. But then the number two of Yunus Khalis stood up. He said, Mr. Riaz, you are asking us for sharing of power. We have sacrificed and we have given blood, not for sharing of power, shirakat-e iqtidar ke liye nahi, but for power, for iqtidar. I in my heart said, yes, this man is very honest. This is what the struggle is about. So, and this is the Afghan mindset. How are you going to develop a conciliatory process out of all this is very difficult. To my mind, it's a long haul, and it will be basically whittling down of the Taliban and their creed. Not because Kabul is strong or the national army is strong, but because Taliban are not the force, not the people of the future or the present. So they are untenable as far as future is concerned. So their influence will whittle down, and gradually, hopefully, there would be peace. But it will be a long haul.
Thank you, Ambassador Riaz, for your optimism. Although, you know, when you look at the facts on the ground, one is... I
didn't say I'm optimistic.
I want to pose to Nasim a question. We've seen that proxies generally in history, and certainly in our case in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and even India, are a double-edged sword. We've seen, as a result of support to the Afghan Taliban, the growth of an indigenous Taliban movement, which has been knocked off its perch in Fatah. But the problem has only been exported across the border, not resolved, in my opinion. And we know that their riposte has been terrorism throughout the country. Now, this nexus, apparent nexus between our local homegrown and the Afghan Taliban, means that our stake in the stability and peace of Afghanistan is that much greater, because as long as Afghanistan is destabilized and that border is poorly policed, those guys, Maulana Fazlullah, etc., sitting across the border, can for a very long time give us a bloody nose across the border and a bloody nose throughout the country. So I'd like you to dilate on this nexus, please.
Thank you. I guess that's one of the key problems and concerns that Pakistan does have, and it's, I think, keeping that in view, that in the last 1 year you've had a lot of interaction between Pakistan's security agencies and with the Afghan government, Afghan military, but obviously one critical step that is needed is trust between intelligence agencies of the two countries, and the setup, whatever kind of fractured setup you have in Kabul and in Pakistan, and that doesn't seem to be happening. In terms of exporting the Taliban abroad, I guess you don't literally mean it. The fact is that Zarb-e-Azb operation led to their...
I mean, you've just pushed them across the border. You haven't eliminated them completely.
No, but I mean, it's not like the plan was to push them across. What would you do on the other side of the border? You didn't have NATO forces sitting there. This goes back to the last 10 years. Any effort on this side was never complemented by either the NATO forces, and Afghan forces never existed. So you've had a real problem there, and that problem continues. I think as far as the Taliban are concerned, perhaps those who are studying the phenomena more keenly, they seem to now talk about nexus more between TTP and the likes of Daesh, and less so with Afghan Taliban. And in fact, Salman Taseer Saab's son, who came back, he basically benefited from something like this. The TTP were the one who were holding him, and when Zarb-e-Azb took place, they took him across, and the battle between TTP and the Afghan Taliban fortunately then led him to be, taken in by the Taliban, who brought him back. That's another thing. But I think you're dealing with a fluid situation, a constantly challenging situation, and until and unless there is more trust and a better working relationship between Kabul and between Islamabad, more so Pindi, this problem in any event, given the terrain, given the last 2 decades that these groups have spread across in that terrain, it's not going to be easy anyway, but this distrust that continues is going to make it worse. And today Pakistan faces this real dilemma and challenge. You go to Kabul and go to Afghanistan, and I've been there about 4 times in the last 6 months, whether it's Jalalabad or whether it's Kabul or whether it's Herat, etc. Everyone from the taxi driver to journalists to there may be odd exception to the waiter in the hotel to political parties, everybody. So there's such a negative view of Pakistan, and you're dealing with that on a day-to-day basis. And I can say, I mean, I kind of beg to differ with Riaz Khan Sahib. I have from Riaz Khan Sahib, I think that obviously Pakistan saw that opportunity of the Taliban, existence of the Taliban, the emergence of the Taliban, and I think you said that you agreed also that Pakistan then used that tool and developed the tool, and the Taliban were really not fighters of the 17th century. Pakistan trained them, gave them weapons, the CIA and so on. Well, Taliban, I guess, came later, post-Mujahideen. But what I'm saying is that it's now we are at such a complex, crossroads. You go to Kabul and you're hated. Like, I don't think I'm exaggerating. And you have about still 2 million Afghans, at least, Afghan refugees here in Pakistan. On the border front, you talk about biometric control, and there's resistance from Afghanistan to that. You talk about engaging the Taliban, and there's a level at which, and Riaz Khan Sahib is right. The Taliban, I remember talking to their foreign minister Mutawakkil, who was here once visiting Islamabad, and I talked to him about the Durand Line, and even the Taliban, who were your kind of, I think to a great extent, creation, they too never wanted to engage with you on such a critical issue, although I think that operationally the Durand Line functions as a border. So what I'm saying is we've committed a huge blunder, and now we're in a situation where it's a tough situation, and I tend to agree with Riaz Khan Sahib ke it's a long haul, there's no instant solution, and we'll keep getting a bad name for some time to come. You talk to the Afghans and all they talk about is, immediately they'll say, you talk about Afghan refugees and the war, and they'll say, no, you took us to the war to this extent for your own benefit, and and you got money because of us, and you got this because of us, and we are suffering because of you. So we have really a huge task at hand, mending our relations at multiple levels with Afghanistan, and the Taliban issue certainly is one that is, that's continuing. I think that, as Rashed Sahib is saying, it's a fact that Pakistan's, and I think there's a realization in Pakistan's security establishment, there's no doubt about it in my mind that there's a change, definitely a change in policy, and there's a realization that the Taliban mean trouble for us. If they get the more they're victorious, the more trouble there is for Pakistan, and yet that's the paradox. The paradox is that equally the realization here is that, look, because when you go to Afghanistan, a lot of the Afghans turn around and say, why don't you kill them? The truth is that that's not a doable thing, and the other thing, of course, is that Pakistan can't have more Afghan blood on its hands. So and this is where the genuine crisis of bad policy hits you. When you make wrong choices, you end up at a situation where it's a catch-22 situation, and that's what it is for the Taliban at this point.
Nasim, you've raised all the questions, and in your discourse answered most of the questions. You talk about trust between Pakistan, Afghanistan, and their intelligence services, and then you go on to explain why that trust isn't there, because of history, okay? Now, I want to ask Ambassador Riaz, the subtext of Nasim's comments was unintended consequences. We not only have them in Afghanistan, we have them inside Pakistan, and arguably the example of the Mujahideen and Taliban struggles, which have brought down to their knees two superpowers, it was an inspiration, in my view, to many of the jihadi movements that you've seen emerge throughout the Middle East and much of the North African, Middle Eastern, and even European landscape. So we have unintended consequences. We have extreme complexity, as Nasim is saying quite rightly. The optimism that you voiced about the possibility of peace, I think the jury is still out. So where do we go from here, even if the security establishment has changed its view? Has it changed sufficiently to be able to leverage whatever influence it has over the Taliban to bring peace to Afghanistan and therefore peace to Pakistan and arguably the region?
Well, there are a number of questions which have been raised. I'll first say that you are very right. Pakistan has made mistakes. I think it was a mistake that our policy fell in this ethnic divide. Taliban, ipso facto, to start with, were not a creation of Pakistan. This is what I was saying. But later on, once they had the influence and control of Kandahar, then after that we started supporting them. Once they were in Kabul, then we thought that they are the force, and we were basically hoping that they will be able to exercise their rule all over Afghanistan. I think that was a mistake. The kind of relationship that we had with Northern Alliance is simply unpardonable from the point of view of state-to-state relations. So then there are these unofficial kind of doctrines seeking strategic depth and all that, which was nonsensical. But nevertheless, that is past. How do people feel now? Generally, the impression that I get is that today there is a realization that conflict in Afghanistan hurts Pakistan more than anybody else apart from Afghanistan itself. That any policies, any measures, anything that we do which can contribute to the continuation of the conflict is not in our interest. But then the challenge or the dilemma is that how do you push the peace process or reconciliation process?
How do you take the turn?
How do you take the turn? One thing that is that, in my view, we should not take any responsibility for the behavior of the Taliban or anyone. Because once we take any responsibility, we are then blamed for not delivering on it. This, I think, is at the heart of the distrust which Kabul talks about. Although, if Kabul is faced with this proposition that what is it that you are prepared to offer to the Taliban, how will you accommodate the Taliban, I don't think that they would be able to come out with any clear response. The thing like Nasim has said that kill the Taliban, of course, there is no question of killing the Taliban. You are going to have a royal mess at your hands. The problem that existed all along for the last 30 years or many years, that there are ungoverned spaces and there is a population overlap. And in this population overlap and ungoverned spaces, our policy is in shambles. So that everybody realizes. So we can't sort of give the head of earlier Mullah Omar or now somebody else on a platter to Kabul. That is not there. But one thing we must ask the Taliban, Afghan Taliban, on whom whatever influence we can exercise, that while they can stay in Pakistan, we can't push them out. They must not use our territory for militancy, for violent acts inside Afghanistan. This is one area where, as a state, we have a responsibility, and we should try as much as we can to in a credible manner,
But
do
Ambassador,
this.
how do we guarantee
Yeah.
that? We
These-
give them
now-
safe havens on our soil.
Yeah, now-
How can we guarantee that they're not going across for military activity?
No, this is a big issue, that how can we guarantee? We cannot guarantee anything, but certainly if there is some influence with some factions of the Taliban, this is something that we should expect from them. We should try, because this is embarrassing us internationally. This is not leading to any solution of the situation. So we have to exercise whatever influence we have in this direction. The other thing is that we have this zarbayas, and the people say that, look, what has happened is that we have just pushed these people on the other side. Now here you can take two views. One is, of course, that if we had zarbayas earlier, when NATO forces were there, we could have asked the NATO forces that they should try to have coordination with us.
You might recall there was the
kind of
suggestion of a hammer and anvil strategy.
Strategy. But today it will not work, because today there are no NATO forces, and today the Afghan National Army cannot operate in these areas, because Afghan National Army, at least in good part, remains ethnic army. So, and it doesn't have the kind of history that our armies in the subcontinent have. So it's a big issue. The other point of view could be that in launching the zarbayas, we should have had this element in our tactics or strategy, that we block wherever we could, so that these people could not go there. But nonetheless, there are two things which are very clear to me, at least, that in order to check the likes of Fazlullah, you will have to work through Kabul. There is no other way. In order to check to a certain extent the Indian influence in that country, about which we have lots of worries, again you have to work through Kabul. Now here there is the question of trust. Trust. The problem, I think, lies in the detail. After all, our army chief has been visiting, the ISI chief has been visiting, Prime Minister has been in contact with President Karzai. So what is it? There has to be some openness, some candidness about what we can do and what we cannot do. And this candidness should be both in our conversation with the Afghan leadership, whichever is the leadership there, and also with the Americans, because Americans have an input over there, because they are present.
But Ambassador, the Afghan Taliban have just announced the start of their spring offensive. Now, in the face of that, what face do we show to Kabul? I mean, that we are perceived as being behind it, whether we are or not. We are perceived as supporting this Afghan offensive on the one hand, spring offensive. On the other hand, we are talking peace, engaging in the quadrilateral process. Do you not think that if you were sitting in Kabul's shoes, you would see this whole situation as contradictory and therefore increase the mistrust?
In Kabul, there are many shoes. There is not one shoe. So this is one problem of Kabul also. But the thing is that Kabul also understands that all the operations that they are taking place on behalf of the Taliban, whichever factions, etc., including those who may be based in Pakistan, they are inside Afghanistan, and there is an autonomous dynamics to it. So what Kabul can expect from us is that whatever influence we can exercise on those Taliban who are here, Afghan Taliban, they should not be allowed to undertake militant activities inside Afghanistan. If they want to do it, they should go there. And there they can plan and they can do whatever, because it is their country. But not sitting in Quetta or sitting in Peshawar or sitting in any of the tribal areas. This is something that we should undertake, and we should try to be as transparent in implementing it as possible.
But
this is a messy situation. In this messy situation, there are no clear answers. If somebody is asking for clear answers, I think
I may be sounding like the devil's advocate here, but allow me to make one comment on what you've said. No guerrilla war in modern history has been successful without safe havens and rear base areas up, beyond the approach of the enemy. And, whether you like it or not, this is the way it's perceived whether in Kabul or arguably even in Washington. I don't know. But the point I'm trying to make is that, okay, you can exercise whatever influence you have in trying to persuade the Afghan Taliban to operate in such a way that, it doesn't look like they're coming from here, but they're operating internally. You're right, they do operate internally, autonomously to a great extent, that being the nature of the insurgency. But the very fact of the existence of safe havens and real safe areas where they can retreat for logistics, for treatment, for rest, for whatever else they need, undercuts our credibility internationally as well as across the border in Kabul. So I don't hear from you, and I'd like to hear from Nasim if she has some answer to this. Okay, if you want to respond, please, go ahead.
Because it is directly sort of in relation to what I had said. First of all, it's not a guerrilla warfare, it's a civil war which is going on in Afghanistan. We have to look at that from this angle. Secondly, what I had said that here it's...
What I meant was that the military strategy is guerrilla, whether it's a civil war or not.
No, it's not even guerrilla. There are many areas which are being controlled by the Taliban. Many areas where the Afghan forces can go, but...
Ambassador, that happens in guerrilla wars also.
Usually they are not able to stay over there. Then there are areas which now even being controlled by Daesh. So it's a civil war situation more than a guerrilla warfare. Secondly, what I said in the beginning, that we are dealing with a very peculiar situation which relates to ungoverned spaces, not of today, but of centuries. Secondly, an overlap of population. And this is an overlap of population. I would, for example, say that mind the border. But I can tell you when these kinds of proposals were made, who were the first to object to it? It was Kabul which was the first to object it. When we said biometrics, who was first to object it? Even today you can see a news item in the papers that Pakistani forces and Torham were trying to fix a camera, security camera. And who got upset? It was the Afghan the troops who get upset, and there was some kind of a sort of confrontation. But these are the sensitivities that we know. So, and these sensitivities add to the complexity of the situation. But there we have to be very transparent and we have to be very upfront in our conversations with both Kabul and with also the Americans. This is what I'm saying.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your response. At the heart of the mistrust, historically, is from Kabul's point of view, from the Afghan point of view, the unacceptability of the border, the Durand Line. We know it was the limit of British conquest in this part of the subcontinent. And they claim that in 1893, when the line was drawn, Afghanistan was weak and perforce had to accept this, but from the heart it did not. And to this day, and as Nasim pointed out, even the Taliban don't accept it. So if the Durand Line is not acceptable, it is going to remain a contentious border, poorly policed, poorly governed, wild. I call it the Wild East. And so, getting trust and getting cooperation with whatever forces are across the border, state forces across the border, may prove a very, very difficult task precisely because of this canker in the side of Kabul. That this boundary, when you say mine or fence or, erect some security arrangements at the border and they get upset, it's because fundamentally they don't accept this as an international border, although it operates as one, as Nasim quite correctly pointed out. But Nasim, we're going round and round in circles, and I have a suspicion that our going round and round in circles reflects what's happening up there as well as on the ground. Everybody's going round and round in circles. Where is this heading? Is it going to go on in this manner? Is it going to spread? Is it going to get worse? Is Pakistan going to be the recipient of greater terrorism and perhaps attacks across the border? What's your take?
Yeah, I guess it is certainly going round and round, and I think we forgot to name another elephant in the room, which is India. I think India is, if we agree that Kabul and Rawalpindi/Islamabad need to be on the same page in terms of dealing with the problem, in terms of dealing with issues of terrorism and as you just mentioned, Daesh, etc. Let me tell you, I drove from Torkham to Jalalabad in November, I think, and when I arrived in Jalalabad, amongst other people, I met the governor of Jalalabad also, and he is a graduate from Faisalabad, by the way, young chap, and Faisalabad Agriculture University. So he said to me, "You're very brave." Everybody kept saying to me, "You're very brave, you've driven." So I said, "What do you mean? I just sat in the car and came. What do you mean brave?" So they said, including the governor, everybody told me that, the road that you were on one side it's occupied by Daesh, and on the other side it's occupied by TTP. So, so this is the kind of situation that we're dealing with. But let me come back to the original point, that Kabul and Pindi/Islamabad need to be on the same page in terms of security threat and the perception of insecurity and so on and so forth. And we are not getting there. And let me just recall this for you, and I was reading this somewhere, that that there was this agreement between NDS, which is the equivalent of ISI in Afghanistan, and between ISI and NDS. About a few months ago, that's just when President Ghani had come to Pakistan and gone back, and things were looking better. And there was some problems NDS had with that agreement, and then somebody from here, top-ranking intelligence person, went there, and they sat down for 10 hours apparently and worked out the nitty-gritties, and still it didn't fly. So obviously India is a player, while I think that in Afghanistan, obviously, every country has a right to their relations with other countries. But I think we've now come into a kind of, it's even more complicated than we've just mentioned, because it's not just Kabul and Kabul and Islamabad Pindi. You've got the India factor there also, and it seems to me that just Pakistan will have to make a greater effort. It seems that Pakistan will have to keep at it, not be reactive to Kabul, not be, in terms of statements, etc., that come out. Pakistan has to understand that, yes, we have an investment of a negative kind we made in Afghanistan. We have to understand that Afghanistan is central to whatever dreams we have for the future in terms of economic corridors, in terms of where we are headed economically, and energy corridors, etc. So, and we also know that what happens in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, in the tribal areas, in other areas, all of that is linked to a great extent to what happens inside Afghanistan. So, Pakistan has to really be working proactively to promote engagement with Kabul, and I think to some extent we're starting to do that. And also, while realizing that the India factor is an important factor there, not react in our classical fashion to the India factor. We've got to, there is no other way. You've heard in the last 45 minutes how complex the issue is. There is, you can't bomb the problem away, you can't put in more terrorists to solve the problem, you can't go to the UN and complain, you can't go to Saudi Arabia and say help us. So the point is, they are your neighbors, and we've made wrong decisions in the past, and we are suffering the consequences, but we need to be proactive. It may sound like a fairy tale solution, but there is no other solution. This is the only solution, because as we all agree that Afghanistan's security is critical to your own security, Afghanistan's stability is critical to your own economic progress and the dreams you have for the future. So I think, tough as it may be, and it's not that tough, because Pakistan's security establishment has been actively engaged with Afghanistan over the last 1 year, and also, let's not underestimate the problems that are taking place inside Afghanistan. There are power battles that are going on inside Afghanistan. If you go to Afghanistan and you meet President Karzai, you will just wonder who's the real president, because President Karzai is still, he calls the shots, he's got support, he has a huge support base, etc. And President Ghani is always in a kind of tenuous position. I wish the ambassador was here, he would contribute more to it, but I think that you make, and what's the lesson? You make wrong choices, you commit blunders, then there's got to be a payback period, and it's a payback period, and I think we just need to be more disciplined.
Well, I think the audience has certainly been taken on a very tortuous journey through the complexities of Afghanistan and Pakistan and the region. And I don't blame you if your head is spinning by now. The solution, if there is one, as is, I think both our panelists have said, is to persist in the present course, which is probably the best course at the moment. And I think there needs to be perhaps a greater dialogue, first and foremost, between Pakistan and the Afghan Taliban before the quadrilateral process can go forward. Before I throw the floor open for questions, I want to say something about courage. Nasim mentioned that she was told by everyone that you're very courageous for having driven from Torkham to Jalalabad. But here is a colleague who's a personification of courage, Kathy Gannon, who was attacked and grievously wounded by some set of madmen in Afghanistan, and her companion was killed. And so I think I want to say salam and tribute to Kathy Gannon. Questions?
Yeah. Can I quickly just add a word? I think Kathy didn't only go through this, terrible, potentially life-taking, terrible terrorist attack. I think that Kathy has been with total dedication and competence and integrity the eyes and ears for the world on Afghanistan. And you'll be surprised that Taliban have seen her as their friend. She's engaged with everybody in Afghanistan. Not that she was their friend because she was writing in favor of them, but I can challenge there's been no better reporting on Afghanistan, and she really has been the eyes and ears for the world on Afghanistan.
Yes, sir.
So, two quick questions. One is for Nasim around what you experienced in Afghanistan around the views of Pakistan. We've spent 40 to 50 years trying to inculcate the Pashtun element in Afghanistan. I guess that was the reason for trying to get influence in the country. What is the Afghan Pashtun view of Pakistan, and is it any different to the general view in Afghanistan of Pakistan of non-Pashtun elements? That's the first question. The second one, if I can offer an alternative hypothesis, is we keep on talking about the solution to Pakistan in the region being Afghanistan. What if the solution to Afghanistan is in Pakistan, if we focus on the area within our control? And sort of two elements to that. What if in adverse circumstances we do something like fence the border within FATA? And what if we do something about FATA itself, which if you look at the condition, it wouldn't surprise you that the sort of things that go on there. Comments on that?
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely, the Pashtun as much as anybody else, exactly the same view, absolutely. And on, finding the solution in Pakistan, I think that this is an issue that people running the security of this country, whose predecessors blundered hugely. I'll keep repeating it because I would argue that what happened in the 80s in Afghanistan, we have not come to terms with the impact it didn't only have on us, but I think globally also. That's a story another time to be told. I mean, in terms of how jihad became such a tool for promoting interest, and Kathy Gannon wrote a terrific book called I for Infidel, in which she wrote about how the brainwashing took place, etc. And you use a religion and you brainwash people to promote a political a security objective. And of course, there was partnership of the US, so Pakistan alone isn't to be blamed for it. But we keep talking about it so much because we are the ones who are paying the most, as much as the Afghans are paying. But I think that some of us would argue that more can be done. You know, we've argued with people who make policy that more needs to be done, and they will turn around and argue that, you know, the power of the Haqqanis, their ability to hit at Kabul has been whittled down greatly, that people here in Pindi will argue that that they've really given a pushback to many groups, Afghan groups, Taliban groups sitting in different areas in Pakistan. They would also argue that how many fronts do we open? We're doing the maximum we can, and while I tend to agree with you, I also have, I feel sympathetic for their point of view, because, it is, again, you've opened a Pandora's box over the last 20, 30 years. How do you deal with it? And in terms of what's happening in FATA, it's still complex, it's complicated. It's like, I don't want to keep harping on that point, but I remember going and doing a program outside, who's this guy, TNSM? Sufi Mohammad's house, outside his house, and we all went in APCs and so on and so forth, and there I was saying to myself, this guy was just a Sufi. And look what we created. So what I'm saying is that I think Pakistan is doing as much as it can. It needs to do more, but it's like you've broken 500 eggs and you want to put them together. Not going to.
You can't make an omelette without breaking eggs, they tell me. Tahira? Here, front row.
शुक्रिया। मैं क्योंकि बहुत पुराने ज़माने की हूँ, तो मैं उस हाथी का जिक्र करना चाहती हूँ जिसका मैंने नाम अभी तक नहीं सुना इस 1 घंटे की गुफ्तगू में, और वो हाथी है जिसका मुझे यकीन है कि 3 में से 2 लोग तो कम से कम इनकार कर देंगे कि वो हाथी है ही नहीं, इनविजिबल या विजिबल है ही नहीं वो हाथी। वो ये वाला हाथी है कि गुड तालिबान और बैड तालिबान और स्ट्रेटेजिक एसेट्स और मिलिट्री डेप्थ। लिहाजा जब आप लोग सॉल्यूशंस की बात करते हैं और हमारी प्रोसेस की बात करते हैं और तमाम तर क्वाड्रिलैटरल और ड्यूरेंट लाइन और ये कर देना चाहिए और वॉल बन जाए या फाटा के लिए कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल रिफॉर्म्स, ये सब ज़रूरी हैं, लेकिन ये बाद की बातें हैं। सबसे पहली बात, अगर हमने इस्लामाबाद और काबुल के दरमियान अमन का रास्ता दिल्ली से जाएगा और श्रीनगर से जाएगा, जब तक हम इंडिया के साथ पीस ट्रीटी नहीं करते और कश्मीर को कश्मीरियों के लिए नहीं छोड़ देते, उस वक्त तक आपकी एस्टैब्लिशमेंट को स्ट्रेटेजिक डेप्थ भी चाहिए होगी, मिलिट्री एसेट्स भी चाहिए होंगे और गुड तालिबान भी चाहिए होंगे, और अफगानिस्तान को भी गुड तालिबान चाहिए होंगे। सो मुल्ला फजलुल्लाह इज अ गुड तालिबान इन अफगानिस्तान एंड द हक्कानी नेटवर्क इज गुड तालिबान in Pakistan.
Thank you, Tahira. I've got your point. Ambassador, I'd like you to respond to this. Does the road to Kabul lie through Srinagar? Delhi?
Well, I can agree to the extent that if Pakistan and India can resolve their problems, I think a lot good can happen. And I would also say that, for example, we talk about transit. Now, if there is a transit facility available, if there are routes to Afghanistan, Central Asia, West Asia, and like we say that Pakistan is a hub, and that becomes a hub, which basically means that the elephant in the room in South Asia, that also is brought into this game, then certainly it will be contributing towards the stability of the entire region. India will have a stake in the stability of the region. So that I think is quite unexceptionable as logic, as an argument. But we somehow the other also deal with real situations. And in that real situations, you tend to ignore many things, and you have different narratives. And you also have today, I think, not just in Pakistan and Afghanistan, but in the entire Islamic world, there is an intellectual crisis today. We don't have a clarity of understanding how we are going to orient ourselves to modernity. And in this modernity, all these things that you are saying about connectivity, about peace, peaceful arrangements, regional arrangements, they are part of that. So, and lastly, I would say that there is no Pashtun card which will help our policy. There is no Taliban card which will help our policy. We have been talking, although this was not an official doctrine, about so-called strategic depth, which I have said was nonsensical. So, and I have written about it. I am not saying it here. I have written about it in my book, you can see. In fact, we tried to then retreat from this concept. Kiani Saab said in 2013, it only means that we want peaceful borders with Afghanistan. So my argument was that if this is so, then we should only talk about peaceful borders with Afghanistan. It would be unexceptionable. Why talk about this very esoteric, confused concept
Yes,
of
I have to ask you to
depth?
wind up because I think they're knocking on the door.
Okay. So again, to sum it, it's going to be long haul. We have to have clarity, and we have to work with Kabul. This is important.
I'm sorry, we've run out of time, Nasim. I have to very quickly wind up. I think the audience has been regaled with an extreme layer upon layer of complexity that afflicts both Afghanistan and Pakistan in the region. And we've talked about bilateral, multilateral, regional, and all kinds of solutions. But I must say that I, at least at the end of the argument, I don't know about you guys, I'm still not convinced that I can see light at the end of the tunnel. And if there's one elephant in the room and we start counting, there might turn out to be a herd. Thank you very much.